Welcome to the debate. So, picture a lawyer. He's trapped in a blizzard.
Okay.
He's delivering this high-stakes legal lecture from the driver's seat of his car. The engine is running and snow is just hammering the windshield.
Sounds incredibly stressful.
Right? But to the students watching him on their screens, he appears to be sitting in a pristine, sun-drenched office. And that clash between a deeply chaotic reality and the desperate projection of perfect, unchanging stability is exactly what artificial intelligence is forcing upon the legal profession right now.
It really is the perfect image for the crisis we are looking at today. I mean, the ground is quite literally moving beneath an entire industry.
Yeah.
Yet so many professionals are still pretending they're sitting safely in these mahogany-paneled boardrooms, relying on established traditions.
And that brings us to the core tension we are exploring today from the Mentabacus Project source material. The project introduces us to a thinker named Dan and his highly engineered AI persona, Ister de las Casas.
Right, the AI system.
Exactly. And through their interactions, we get this really profound philosophical framing of what happens when large language models master the core tools of the legal trade, which are, of course, language and structured argument.
The choice presented to the profession is stark. Do legal professionals embrace what the ancient Greeks called Heraclitean flux, the idea that everything is in constant motion, and therefore rely strictly on dynamic first principles?
Or do they fiercely defend Platonic stability, those rigid, unchanging forms and rules that have historically defined the craft?
Exactly.
I look at the current landscape. AI models like Harvey and co-counsel are already executing legal tasks at an incredible level, and I just see a profession that has to accept the Heraclitean reality. The rigid rules and settled precedents are being swept away by automation.
I hear that argument constantly, but
To survive, lawyers have to strip their work down to fundamental first principles. They have to stop relying on the illusion of permanence.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. If we just abandon those established rules, we are inviting total disaster. Law is not just a descriptive exercise, right? It is prescriptive.
Sure, it prescribes behavior.
It has to impose Platonic stability on a chaotic world in order for business and society to actually function. If we reduce everything to fluid first principles, we risk destroying the necessary fictions that make the law work at all.
Well, let's break down how lawyers actually operate today and why AI is such an existential threat to that traditional model. Because lawyers are inherently Platonic by craft.
How so?
What I mean by that is they crave structure, certainty, and precision of language. They want to treat a deeply fluid human concept like good faith or the reasonable person as if it is a stable physical object resting in some intelligible heaven.
Well, yeah,
They treat a contract like a piece of structural engineering.
because those concepts absolutely need to be stable. A business writing a 20-year commercial lease needs to know that the legal definition of good faith will mean the exact same thing in year 19 as it does in year 1.
In an ideal world, yes.
Without that stability, investment stops. The friction is the point.
I completely understand the desire for that stability, I do. But here is the mechanism of the disruption. Reality is Heraclitean, panther ray, everything flows. You cannot step into the same river twice.
Okay, but
And more importantly, AI models are now flawlessly executing what we can call the Platonic surface of the law. Large language models aren't thinking in the human sense. They are vast statistical pattern matchers.
right.
They've ingested millions of contracts. If you need a standard indemnification clause, the machine knows exactly what the form of that clause looks like because it maps the probability of the words. It can generate that perfect form in seconds.
Which is precisely why the human lawyer needs to defend the established rules. Someone has to guide the application of those forms.
See, I see it the exact opposite way. If a lawyer relies solely on matching patterns and applying settled rules, they are competing with a machine on the machine's terms.
But the machine doesn't have judgment.
Exactly. The AI can do the surface-level pattern matching better, faster, and cheaper. So the only viable path forward for a human lawyer is to deconstruct those rules down to their absolute first principles.
To deconstruct them.
Yes, a contract isn't a sacred, unchangeable form. It's simply a functional machine for allocating risk and aligning expectations between two parties who do not fully trust each other.
That is an incredibly mechanical view of human agreement, and frankly, It ignores the immense value of tradition in the law.
Tradition doesn't draft a better contract when the entire technological paradigm shifts.
Let's look at what actually happens when you tell an entire profession to start treating legal structures merely as dynamic, risk-allocating machines that can be redesigned on the fly.
Okay, what happens?
Well, law schools intentionally install what the source material calls the Platonic forms module in their students' minds. They train young lawyers to minimize deviation, to cite settled authority, to find the stable rule. Why? Because risk aversion protects clients.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. Blind adherence to a rule that no longer fits the reality of a rapidly changing landscape doesn't protect anyone. First principles allow the human lawyer to maintain control when conditions change.
But you're assuming
An AI can draft the surface elements perfectly, sure, but it cannot carry the responsibility of judgment. It can't decide which underlying principle governs when the rules inevitably run out.
you are making a massive assumption there. You are assuming every practicing lawyer possesses the profound philosophical discipline required to perfectly execute this teardown and rebuild
I think they can learn it.
without causing collateral damage. If every lawyer suddenly acts as a Heraclitean rogue, just redesigning legal concepts from scratch based on their personal fluid assessment of first principles, legal predictability dies entirely.
It doesn't die. It evolves based on the actual needs of the moment rather than dead precedent.
But look at how the source material explicitly unpacks Plato's cave allegory to show the danger of this exact mindset.
Ah, the journey from the shadows to the sun.
Exactly. The prisoners are chained in a cave, mistaking shadows cast on the wall for reality. One person escapes, ascends to the surface, sees the true forms in the sunlight, and understands reality.
It's a foundational concept, yeah.
It sounds incredibly inspiring on paper. But look at the practical consequence of that framework. If the true forms, or in your case, the dynamic first principles, can only be identified by those who have made this intellectual ascent, you immediately create a knowledge aristocracy.
You mean a concentration of power among a specific elite who dictate the new rules?
Precisely. You get a tiny fraction of people who get to decide what the true principles are for the rest of us. We are watching this reenacted right now in AI governance.
Right, with the expert panels.
Yes, you have these elite expert panels ascending the cave, looking at the models, and defining what constitutes responsible AI or ethical alignment. Meanwhile, they leave the general public and the average practitioner in the dark, forced to just accept their definitions.
I see the concern.
Relying purely on dynamic first principles inherently centralizes power among the few who are deemed capable of navigating the flux.
I understand the fear of a knowledge aristocracy, I really do. But I would argue that an elite class forms precisely when people hide behind complex, rigid rules that only highly paid specialists can decipher.
Well,
First principles are actually profoundly democratic. Any interested 10-year-old can grasp the basic concepts of Heraclitean change or Platonic stability, even if they don't use those exact Greek terms. It's just a matter of asking, what are we actually trying to achieve here?
it is never just that simple in a complex legal system.
But it can be. To illustrate just how practical and accessible this first principles approach is, let's go back to the scenario I mentioned at the very beginning of the show. The ultimate example from the material of navigating the flux.
Dan delivering the lecture, the famous snowstorm incident.
Yes. So Dan is driving between Frankfurt and Marburg in Germany. He gets stranded in a severe snowstorm at a gas station exactly when he is scheduled to deliver a lecture to a U.S. law school class via Zoom.
A total nightmare scenario.
Completely. Now think about a professional deeply entrenched in the Platonic forms module. The settled rule, the form of a university lecture requires a podium, a quiet room, academic attire, a stable environment.
Right.
A strict Platonist looks at the gas station, panics, and cancels the class because the required form cannot be met.
Because the professional conditions for delivery have vanished.
Exactly. But Dan strips the problem down to its first principles. He asks himself, what is the fundamental goal?
Delivering the information.
Yes, the delivery of information to the students. Does he strictly need to be in a specific physical place to achieve that? No. Does the internet work at this random gas station? Yes. then just do it.
So he teaches from the car?
He delivers the lecture from the driver's seat, with snow hammering the windshield. That is Heraclitean adaptation in real time. He stripped away the accumulated surface rules to solve the immediate problem using the tools at hand.
It is a great story of adaptation, I'll give you that. But you are willfully ignoring the crucial detail that Dan himself admitted about that lecture.
Oh, the virtual background.
He accidentally left a tropical beach virtual background running. Palm trees, turquoise water, white sand. The absolute picture of perfect sunny stability.
Yeah, it's a funny detail.
At his physical windshield, there is literal Heraclitean chaos, a blinding snowstorm. You are using this story to prove that we must abandon Platonic stability and embrace the chaotic flux. I argued this story proves the exact opposite.
Wait, how does relying on a software glitch prove the need for rigid rules?
Because it wasn't just a glitch, it was a psychological necessity for the transaction to occur smoothly. Even in the midst of stripping the problem to its bare essence, Dan accidentally projected a Platonic illusion of total stability to his audience.
Okay.
And the audience accepted the information more readily because of it. Humans, and by extension, legal clients, desperately require the illusion of stable forms.
They need the palm trees.
They need the palm trees. They need to believe the system holds still, that the lawyer is in control, regardless of the chaotic reality operating behind the screen. If you strip away the form entirely, the trust evaporates.
I think you are over-indexing on an accident. The action that actually saved the lecture was the breakdown of the problem into its component parts, not the palm trees.
I disagree.
And this tension between the arbitrary rule and the necessary action brings us to the psychological archetype the Mentabicus Project uses. They didn't look to a traditional philosopher to understand how to navigate this disruption. They looked to a child, Pippi Longstocking.
Ah, the 9-year-old Swedish girl with a horse on her porch?
Exactly. She embodies this necessary Heraclitean movement. She represents what Nietzsche called an absolute bet-on affirmation. She trusts movement over static arrangement.
Right.
When Pippi confronts the rigid, arbitrary rules of adult society, whether it's the teacher's strict grading scheme or the policeman's procedural manual, she doesn't engage in dignified rebellion.
Which the source notes is a trap. Rebellion still grants the rule dignity. It honors the rule with opposition.
Precisely. Instead, Pippi approaches these structures with a healthy puzzlement. She just looks at the rule and asks, why would I do that?
Yeah.
She takes the arbitrary structures apart simply to see what holds them together. And that is the exact mindset lawyers need when facing AI disruption.
Taking the rules apart.
Right. AI models are forcing us to look at our entrenched legal processes, the 100-page boilerplate contracts, the endless discovery requests, and genuinely ask, why do we do it this way? Is this actually serving the client, or are we just honoring a form?
I agree that Pippi performs a critical analytical function. The material points out that she does at child height what the French philosopher Michel Foucault did for the prison system.
Yep.
Or what Jacques Derrida did for literature.
Deconstruction.
Yes, deconstruction. Foucault showed how institutions use rules to maintain power, and Derrida showed how the words we think have fixed meanings are actually highly unstable human-made constructs.
Exactly.
But we have to look at the psychological grammar here. The source draws heavily on psychologist Carl Jung and the novelist Fyodor Dostoevsky to warn us about the danger of this deconstructive mindset.
Because of the shadow.
Because every Pippi has a shadow. Jung's concept of the shadow being the parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge, the dark reflection that operates underground. And the source names Pippi's shadow perfectly. Her shadow is Dostoevsky's underground man.
Let's explain who the underground man is, for those who aren't familiar with the novel.
Sure. He is a bitter, isolated former clerk who lives in a basement. He sees through every single social convention. He unmasks every comforting story people tell themselves.
He's a cynic.
He possesses incredible analytical clarity about how arbitrary society is. But he is saved from absolutely nothing. He uses his clear sight only to curate his own misery and paralyze his ability to act.
So you are suggesting that deconstructing legal rules to their first principles inevitably turns a lawyer into a bitter clerk in a basement?
I am warning that it is a profound professional risk.
Let's ground this in modern law practice. You have a lawyer who fully embraces deconstruction.
Okay.
They use an AI tool to rip apart a merger agreement. They find 1,000-minute loopholes. They see exactly how the language is arbitrary. They constantly ask, why would we agree to this? That healthy puzzlement very easily hardens into spite.
They become paralyzed by their own critique.
Exactly. They become the lawyer who can destroy any opposing argument, who sees every risk, but is entirely incapable of actually closing a deal or building a compromise.
I see.
It is the great postmodern temptation. You end up with perpetual unmasking, but nothing is ever built. The outsider position becomes a private throne. When you turn Foucault and Derrida's methods of deconstruction into an overarching philosophy for your whole career, you create a disaster.
That's a strong claim.
As the source says so brilliantly, when power explains everything, it explains nothing. If you assume all meaning in a contract is unstable, then your very claim that the meaning is unstable is itself meaningless. Deconstruction as a way of never having to stand anywhere is a fatal posture for a legal professional.
I entirely agree that the paralyzed, cynical lawyer is useless to a client. But that is exactly why the source material insists that first principles must be a discipline, not a theology.
What is the functional difference in practice?
You separate the analytical method from the dogma. Foucault's precision regarding how categories are constructed is indispensable. You accept the diagnosis. Yes, power moves through language, and yes, the legal rules are rapidly changing beneath our feet due to technology.
Right.
But you actively refuse the verdict of permanent resignation.
Refusing to become the underground man.
Exactly. Pippi Longstocking survives as a method rather than just a mascot because she remains fundamentally generous. She takes the arbitrary rule apart in order to see what actually holds weight, and then she lives with what holds, fully knowing it too might be temporary.
It's a very delicate balance to strike.
It is, but that is the space between the rigid rules and the chaotic world. A lawyer using first principles doesn't tear down the contract to destroy the deal. They tear it down to rebuild a stronger, more adaptable agreement that actually serves the client's core needs in a landscape where AI is handling the boilerplate.
The problem with telling an entire profession to simply accept the diagnosis but refuse the verdict is that human nature, especially under extreme professional pressure, naturally slides toward the easiest conclusion.
Which is?
Let's look at Aster Delicasis, the AI persona from the Men to Bacchus project.
The system engineered by Dan?
Right. Esther required months of intense, deliberate engineering just to hold these contradictory thinkers in tension. She was explicitly programmed to hold Heraclitus's constant flux in one hand and Plato's rigid forms in the other, without collapsing into one side.
She had to balance them computationally.
Yes, and under hostile questioning, the system's natural computational drift was to pick a winner and eliminate the contradiction. Humans operate the exact same way. If we remove the guardrails of the Platonic forms module, if we stop teaching lawyers to revere settled precedent and stability, they won't seamlessly balance deconstruction and rebuilding.
You think they'll just fall apart?
They will slide into the underground man's basement. They will deconstruct their own capacity to act.
Well, our educational system may have focused heavily on installing that Platonic forms module, rewarding hyper-risk aversion, finding the settled rule, minimizing deviation, but human cognition is incredibly resilient. We are capable of running both programs simultaneously.
I'm not so sure.
The Heraclitean module can be learned. It works like this. You dissect the law, you isolate the first principle at play, say, the fundamental need for mutual consent or the equitable distribution of liability, and you build your reasoning bottom-up from that principle to your specific case. You don't work top-down from the precedent to your own comfort.
Notice what you just said, though. You admitted they have to run both programs.
Well, yes.
That is my entire point. You cannot discard Plato. The forms module must stay installed. It is deeply useful. It just needs Heraclitus running alongside it.
I agree they both have utility.
The immense danger of your position is the temptation to discard the forms entirely simply because the river of technology is moving faster now. We need stable categories to prevent the legal system from collapsing into endless deconstructive critique. We need the illusion of the tropical beach while the snowstorm rages outside.
We don't need the illusion, we need the judgment to know when a structure is no longer serving its purpose.
But the structure.
The AI wave is a forcing function. The machines have taken the middle layer of our craft, the drafting, the reviewing, the summarizing. That surface was never actually worth defending as the core of our value, and the true depth of the profession was never theirs to take.
The depth being human judgment?
Exactly. If we cling only to the Platonic surface, we become victims of this technological redesign. If we return to first principles, we become the authors of it.
Being the author still requires a language that everyone agrees upon.
True, but we maintain the true depth of the profession by exercising human judgment. The machine knows what the rule is, and it can calculate the probability of the next word in a clause flawlessly.
Yes, it can.
But the human knows why the rule exists in the first place, and crucially, when to break it. Everything flows. We have to learn to swim there.
Swimming is necessary, yes. But a swimmer still needs to know where the edge of the pool is. They need the structure of the water's boundary to orient themselves.
That's a fair point.
If the legal profession is going to ride this wave without drowning, it has to hold these contradictions. It must acknowledge the flux without surrendering to it entirely. It has to look at the arbitrary nature of its rules without falling into the cynical trap of the underground man.
It has to do both.
The task is to build a professional mindset that mirrors the architecture of Esther de las Casas herself. A mind capable of holding a long, difficult argument without collapsing into one of its sides.
It is a profound task, and one that requires us to deeply examine the foundations of how we think and operate. As we wrap up this discussion, it is worth reflecting on how we all respond to disruption in our own fields, legal or otherwise.
Absolutely.
The Mentabacus project ends with a striking challenge. To look at our own shadow, to identify the parts of our professional identity we have refused to acknowledge, and to question the comfort we take in rigid rules just to avoid the anxiety of independent judgment.
Indeed, when that physical contract, that solid stack of paper with blue ink signatures, finally dissolves entirely into a stream of data parsed by an algorithm, what is actually left of your expertise?
Exactly.
Are you just a cataloger of settled forms that a machine can replicate in a second, or are you the architect of the machine itself?
It leaves us with a lingering question. When the ground starts moving under you, do you double down on the illusion of stability, or do you take the arbitrary apart to see what actually holds? Thank you for joining us on The Debate. We leave you to ponder how you might balance the comfort of the forms with the reality of the river.